Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be continuing our deep dive into the complicated spiritual tool known as the Ouija board. In our first episode on the Ouija board, we covered its origins, connections to the spiritualism and spiritism movement sweeping over the United States and Europe, and its eventual birth as a product of a toy company. If you still need to watch part 1 of my Ouija deep dive, I recommend you go back and watch that first, but nevertheless, I'm going to provide a brief recap of what we discussed in that video to get everyone back up to speed. When we left off, we covered the Ouija board's origins at the Cunard Novelty Company in 1890, with its release occurring in late 1891 or early 1892. William Fuld, who later took over the company, played a significant role in establishing the Ouija board's popularity and dominance. He effectively eliminated competitors and imitators through infringement claims, leaving little room for alternatives. However, tragedy struck when William fell from the third floor of his factory on February 24, 1927, resulting in his untimely death. His children assumed control of the company and eventually sold its assets, including the Ouija board, to Parker Brothers in 1966. Subsequently, the company changed hands several times until Hasbro acquired it in 1991, and the board remains under their ownership to this very day. Before that, however, we delved into the origins of the Ouija board. It traces back to the mid-19th century, when spiritualism and spiritism, new religious movements focused on communicating with the spirit world, gained prominence. These religions employed various methods and tools to facilitate spiritual communication. Practices such as table turning and mediumship, along with devices like the psychograph and planchette, paved the way for a straightforward method of spiritual communication. In 1886, the first talking boards emerged in the spiritualist camps across Ohio, which later inspired Charles Cunard's creation of the Ouija board. With our deeper understanding of the Ouija board's origins and its dominance in the talking board market, we can now delve into its more intricate aspects. One such aspect is the exploration of automatism, or the ideomotor effect, and the intriguing possibility of the Ouija board accessing our subconscious rather than the spiritual realm. Also, we will examine how the Ouija board might simultaneously tap into our subconscious and provide connections with the spirit realm. Additionally, I will attempt to unravel the transition of the Ouija board from a harmless parlor game to a perceived sinister device associated with pure evil. However, before we get started, I want to ask that if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like. Also, if you come back here on the regular and aren't subscribed, why not subscribe? It's a quick and easy way to keep up with my uploads and tells me that you all are enjoying the videos. But now, let's dive back into the Ouija board, and thank you all so much for watching. Typically in my videos, I save the non-paranormal, or in this case, non-spiritual explanations, and skeptics' explanations until the end of the videos. However, given how complicated the Ouija board is, it would be far more useful for me to cover these beforehand, because as you'll see, the alternatively accepted theories are just as terrifying and mysterious as spirits. Unlike spiritualists and believers alike, the skeptic's explanation is that your mind is the cause of the phenomenon. Specifically, skeptics believe that the movement of the planchette is the reaction of a phenomenon named the ideomotor effect. The ideomotor effect, which is also referred to as automatism, was initially proposed by William Carpenter in 1852. In a scientific study paper, Carpenter aimed to comprehend and challenge the concepts of spiritual communication, primarily focusing on table turning and the planchette methods. According to Carpenter's theory, the phenomenon was not spiritual, but rather a subconscious involuntary movement driven by the user's brain to obtain the desired answer. If this idea appears far-fetched, it is worth considering the existence of numerous subconscious actions and reactions already present within the human body. For example, when we experience hunger or are exposed to hunger-stimulating scents, our body will automatically and subconsciously respond by producing saliva to aid in food digestion. Additionally, the ideomotor effect is not the sole brain function that could potentially influence the subconscious movements associated with the Ouija board and its similar devices. The human mind has a natural tendency towards seeking patterns and understanding. When faced with something incomprehensible, our brain tends to try to fill in the gaps to complete our thoughts. This phenomenon can be observed in cases of pareidolia, where the subconscious mind attempts to perceive faces or specific objects from random patterns or objects. Considering the inherent human desire to seek understanding and answers, it is not really far-fetched to speculate that if one uses the Ouija board with the firm belief in contacting a demon or entity, their mind might deceive them into spelling out specific words, or directing the planchette towards the yes indicator on the board when the question, "Are you a demon?" is asked. Now, most believers and spiritualists vehemently reject the notion that the ideomotor effect is responsible for the phenomenon that is observed with the Ouija board. They argue that there is a distinct, unsettling sensation associated with using the board, which they believe cannot be attributed to subconscious problem solving. However, as with everything I cover on this channel, it is important to thoroughly explore the explanations both believers and skeptics put forth and consider all the possibilities surrounding the subjects we cover here. That is why I decided to cover the ideomotor effect before delving into the intricate and enigmatic aspects of the Ouija. As you watch the next couple of videos and listen to this story, I encourage you to imagine these stories from two different perspectives. Firstly, imagine them from a spiritual standpoint and decide whether these entities or messages are associated with those malevolent forces. Secondly, imagine them as subconscious messages stemming from the hidden desires of the users. Finally, ask yourself whether the idea of repressed subconscious desires driving the users of the board towards sinister actions is more, less, or equally terrifying to the concept of sinister acts committed by entities summoned through the board. I'll discuss the ideomotor effect again in the next video and give my thoughts on that theory and the spiritual theory. For now, however, I feel the best place to continue our deep dive on the Ouija board is to attempt to understand when and why the Ouija board became associated with evil spirits and malevolent forces. It could be argued that the Ouija board was considered evil right from its inception in the late 1800s due to the strong opposition from the Christian population in the United States. However, much of this initial resistance seems to originate from churches disapproving of women voicing their opinions and a tendency within Christianity to label anything they fear and or can't comprehend as satanic. However, in my research, I wanted to find what event took the board from famous to infamous, and I believe I found the moment that did just that. In 1935, a boy with the pseudonym Robbie Doe was born in Washington, D.C. He was the only child of a Catholic father and Lutheran mother, and he mostly led a quiet but occasionally dysfunctional childhood. Everything changed in 1949 when Robbie was around 13 years old. During that year, Robbie and his parents started hearing knocking and scratching noises all around their home. At first, they didn't pay much attention to the noises and assumed they might be dealing with a mice infestation at worst. However, after the family called in an exterminator to inspect the house, no evidence of any rodent infestation was found. After the exterminator's findings, Robbie became the apparent target of whatever force was at work, and he started experiencing physical attacks by the entity. Multiple reports indicate that Robbie's bed would be violently shaken by an unseen force, and he was forcefully pulled off his bed on several occasions by the same mysterious entity. The only connection the parents could find to these mysterious events was the death of Robbie's aunt, who was simply known as Tilly. Tilly was a devout spiritualist and fervent believer in the paranormal and supernatural. And from a young age, Robbie was captivated by Tilly's spiritualistic practices and had a close bond with her. Though it's not certain if Tilly ever involved Robbie in any of these seances, it is confirmed that she was in possession of a Ouija board. Robbie was deeply affected by the news of Tilly's passings, and he became rather somber and distraught around the house. Following several weeks of enduring bizarre occurrences and physical attacks on their son, the parents eventually turned to a Lutheran minister named Luther Scholes for help. Sensing the potential for demonic possession or an attachment, Scholes conducted multiple prayers for the family at their home, his own home, and various Lutheran congregations. Unfortunately, despite these efforts, the prayers proved unsuccessful and Robbie's torment continued. Scholes then opted for the next course of action, which involved having Robbie stay at his house with him and his wife to closely observe Robbie to understand the situation better. On the first night of Robbie's stay, Scholes heard creaking coming from the bed in the room where Robbie was staying. Upon entering the room, Scholes placed his hand on the footboard of the bed and he could feel it vibrating. What confused Scholes, however, was the appearance that Robbie was wide awake but was completely motionless, almost as if he was in a trance-like state. After the bed vibration stopped, Scholl suggested that Robbie try to sleep in an armchair that was present in the room. This time, Scholl decided to stay in the room and observe Robbie as he slept, hoping to witness any further unusual occurrences. Soon after, the armchair in which Robbie was sitting began to slide back a few inches on its own. Scholl then asked Robbie to place both of his legs on the chair so his full weight would be on it, but this still did not stop the force from moving it. The chair was eventually pushed all the way back into a wall, and moments later the chair's back legs slowly lifted off the ground until Robbie slipped out of the chair and onto the floor. Interestingly, Robbie was completely unharmed after the fall, but remained in that peculiar trance-like state. Despite the events he witnessed that night, Scholl advised the parents to admit Robbie to a mental health facility, suspecting that it might be a result of a psychological breakdown triggered by the loss of Robbie's aunt. However, Robbie's stay at the facility only worsened the situation, and he reportedly became aggressive and violent towards the staff. So, after less than a week of being committed, Robbie's parents decided to release him and took him to St. Louis, Missouri. Robbie's mother, who was also from St. Louis, hoped that her extended family would have a solution to help their son. Unfortunately, like Robbie's parents, her family consisted of a mix of Lutherans and Catholics, leading to disagreements over the best approach to assist the boy. Although not explicitly stated, it can be surmised that this history of religious strife contributed significantly to the dysfunction that afflicted Robbie's life before and after this event. Eventually, the family decided to seek help from a Jesuit reverend named Raymond Bishop. Upon hearing the story, Bishop traveled to the mother's family home, where Robbie and his parents were staying, to bless him. However, upon witnessing Robbie's condition, Bishop believed it was more than just an attachment and considered it a full-fledged demonic possession. Bishop then contacted another reverend, William Bowdern, and sought permission from Archbishop Joseph Ritter to perform an exorcism on the child. After hearing the details of the supposed possession, the Archbishop swiftly granted permission for the exorcism, which was scheduled for March 16, 1949. Before and during the exorcism, Robbie displayed symptoms that are now commonly associated with demonic possession. He vomited multiple times, developed bodily scratches and blisters all over his body, and expelled various bodily fluids through the process. Additionally, despite being just a 13-year-old, he exhibited incredible strength, which made it difficult for the family and priests to restrain him, and they reportedly got physically attacked by the boy. Initially, the exorcism appeared to be successful because Robbie seemed to have no recollection of the events that had occurred, but unfortunately, within a few days, it became apparent that Robbie had relapsed into the possession. Instead of continuing the exorcism at home, the family and priest decided to place Robbie in the security ward of a nearby hospital on March 21st, 1949. The decision to relocate Robbie to the hospital was driven by two primary reasons. Firstly, the hospital setting would provide easier restraint to prevent harm to others or himself. Secondly, removing Robbie from the family's home would shield them from witnessing the distressing sight of the child's demonic possession. Following the relocation, multiple exorcisms were performed on Robbie over approximately 2 weeks. Despite appearing cured at times, he continued to experience those relapses. Hoping that baptism would aid in the process, Robbie's parents and the priests took him to a nearby Catholic church on April 1st, where he was baptized and received communion successfully. However, one night after an exorcism, he claimed to have a dream of a sword-bearing angel, ridding his mind of those demons. Following this dream, Robbie never experienced another possession episode, and reportedly lived the rest of his life without any further paranormal or supernatural occurrences. As I often stress with cases involving the paranormal, the Robbie Doe story is filled with fabrications and inaccuracies. However, for this episode, I won't be delving into the story or its explanations, as that is not the sole focus of this episode. Now, you might be curious about how this event could have contributed to the fear and infamy surrounding the Ouija board, given that the board plays only a minor role in the story and isn't even a confirmed part of the story. Well, as it turns out, you're absolutely right to wonder that, because this case isn't what attributed to the board's status as an evil device. Instead, the Robbie Doe story served as an inspiration for what would become the catalyst of the Ouija's reign of terror. In August 1949, a college student named William Peter Blatty studying in Washington, D.C., came across an Associated Press publication about the possession of Robbie Doe, and he was instantly captivated by the story. Blatty's fascination with the case lasted over 2 decades, leading to his book The Exorcist, published in 1971. The book serves as a dramatized retelling of the Robbie Doe story, with many of its elements mirroring the actual events that took place during the eventful possession. In the prologue of The Exorcist, we meet Father Marin, an elderly Catholic priest and archaeologist who is leading an excavation in northern Iraq. During the dig, one of his team members discovers a green amulet in the shape of a demonic face. Father Marin's reaction to the charm is highly negative, and he begins to experience disturbing visions. Upon closer examination, Marin identifies the face as that of an entity named Pazuzu, who was a real-life Assyrian and Babylonian figure known as the Demon of the South Wind. Marin believes that the excavation accidentally unleashed Pazuzu's spirit into the world, and the prologue concludes with Father Marin returning to the United States. In this retelling, the story revolves around a 12-year-old girl named Reagan and her mother, Chris. They are temporarily residing in Georgetown, Washington, D.C., when Chris starts to hear strange noises coming from Reagan's room and notices that her furniture keeps moving around, and knocks and scratches can be heard throughout Reagan's room. The similarities to the Robbie Doe story begin with Chris's initial response, as she doesn't think much of these events and assumes the house has a rodent infestation. Despite setting traps in the attic, where the noises appear to originate from, no rats are caught, and the attic is found to be perfectly clean. But Chris remains unfazed and believes there must be a logical explanation for these occurrences. Over the next few days, strange incidents persist around the house, especially involving Reagan. One day, when Chris returns home from work and visits Reagan's room, she notices a Ouija board in the corner. Curious, Chris asks Reagan if she knows how to use the board, and Reagan admits to using it frequently to communicate with someone she calls Captain Howdy. When Chris tries to use the board with Reagan, the planchette moves rapidly to the no indicator on the board. Following this incident with the Ouija board, Reagan's behavior becomes erratic and aggressive towards everyone around her. Chris, concerned about her daughter's well-being, takes Reagan to the doctor, suspecting that a potential mental disorder or reaction is taking place. However, all the tests ran on Reagan come back negative for any mental condition that could explain her behavior. Meanwhile, strange occurrences continue to happen in the house which cannot be attributed to Reagan's mental state, and the situation reaches a breaking point when, during a party at Chris's house, Reagan delivers a cryptic message to one of the guests and unexpectedly urinates in front of everyone. Chris quickly ends the party and rushes Reagan back to her room. However, shortly afterward, Chris hears Reagan screaming, and upon entering her room, she witnesses Reagan's entire bed shaking violently while Reagan is in a state of panic. Following this distressing incident, Chris urgently requests Reagan's doctors to visit the house and assess her condition. Upon their arrival, Reagan starts shouting curses at the doctors and engages in shocking behavior, including inappropriate actions with a crucifix, if you catch my drift. Despite these alarming events, the doctors remain convinced that Reagan's condition is purely mental. However, Chris is becoming increasingly convinced that something far more evil is affecting her daughter. In a desperate attempt to find answers, Chris arranges for a hypnotist to come to the house and interact with Reagan. While under hypnosis, Reagan reveals that there is an entity residing inside of her, feeding off her energy and slowly killing her. Despite this revelation, the doctors attribute the issue to a mental condition and advise Chris to take Reagan to a mental health facility. Though hesitant, Chris ultimately agrees to send Reagan to the facility for further evaluation and treatment. After spending around 2 weeks in the mental health facility, Reagan returns to Georgetown, but her condition hasn't really improved significantly. The doctors inform Chris that Reagan is suffering from a rare condition where the person believes that they have been possessed by an entity. They explain that such cases are extremely rare in modern times due to advancements in scientific and mental health research. Interestingly, this condition predominantly affects individuals with a religious background. Yet, Chris is an atheist and has not taught Reagan anything about religion. Chris becomes increasingly convinced that Reagan's condition is not merely mental, but rather spiritual. She firmly believes that her daughter is possessed and becomes convinced that an exorcism is the only viable solution to cure her daughter. After Reagan's return, Chris goes out of the house, leaving her friend Sharon to watch over Reagan. At some point, Sharon leaves to get Reagan's medicine, but Chris returns home before her. Chris is upset when Sharon arrives back and yells at her for leaving her bedridden daughter home alone. But Sharon defends herself, saying that she called Chris's boss and friend, a man named Burke Dennings, to watch over Reagan while she was away. Both women assume that Dennings, who was known to be quite an alcoholic, left after getting bored with watching Reagan. Soon after, one of Chris's co-workers visits the house and informs her that Burke Dennings was found dead at the bottom of a long flight of stairs near their home. This information devastates Chris, especially when a homicide investigator starts looking into Dennings' death. The detective suspects foul play, given that Dennings' body was discovered with his head twisted all the way around. The detective, who was known as Kinderman, visits a Jesuit priest named Damien Karras. Chris had already contacted Father Karras earlier in the story, expressing her growing belief that Reagan was possessed and that an exorcism might be the only solution for her. Father Karras, being a licensed psychiatrist, had been seeing Reagan for her troubling condition. Kinderman approaches Karras to gather information related to the investigation of Dennings' death. However, all Karras can provide is the details about Reagan's deteriorating condition. As Reagan's condition reaches an all-time low, Chris becomes fully convinced that her daughter is genuinely possessed and requests Father Karras to perform an exorcism. However, Karras, still approaching the case with a rational mindset, explains that exorcisms are no longer commonly practiced due to the advancements in mental health studies. He also adds that performing an exorcism requires the approval of the head of the church after presenting solid evidence for a case of possession. Despite his initial hesitation, Karras starts to realize the severity of the situation and witnesses Chris's desperation and the dire state of Reagan's condition. Acknowledging the anger and urgency within Chris, Karras decides to gather evidence and prepare for an exorcism as a last resort in case no other solutions can be found. As the events surrounding Reagan's condition continue to weigh heavily on Karras, he becomes consumed by the desperate search for a rational explanation. Despite his efforts, he can't find any logical reason for Reagan's disturbing behavior. The repeated visitations and countless hours of examining evidence eventually lead Karras to a startling realization. He too starts to believe that Reagan is indeed possessed. With this newfound belief, Karras presents all his gathered evidence to the head of the church, seeking approval for an exorcism. The request is granted, but it is decided that a different priest will lead the exorcism. To Karras' surprise, the priest assigned to the task is none other than Father Marin, who was the same priest from the prologue who inadvertently played a role in the release of the demon Pazuzu. When Marin arrives at the McNeil home, an eerie silence falls over Reagan before she suddenly calls out Marin's name in the deep demonic voice the entity uses to speak. Sensing the urgency of the situation, Marin requests to start the exorcism immediately, to which both Chris and Karras agree, and they proceed with that exorcism, with Karras and Marin making their way up to Reagan's bedroom. Upon entering the room, the demon inside Reagan immediately recognizes Marin and starts taunting and insulting him. Marin remains unfazed by the demon's words and proceeds with the exorcism. Reagan reacts negatively to all aspects of the ritual, and in her possessed states, turns her taunts and insults towards Karras, trying to provoke a reaction from him since Marin refuses to react. After several days of unsuccessful attempts to exorcise Reagan, Marin sees the toll the situation is taking on Karras and advises him to go home and rest for the night. Karras follows Marin's suggestion and returns to his room in the Jesuit dormitory. Shortly after, he receives a visit from Kinderman, who alludes to the fact that he knows Reagan is responsible for Dennings' death. However, due to Reagan's age and her condition, Kinderman has no intentions of prosecuting her. The following day, after getting some much-needed rest, Karras returns to the McNeil home. However, when he enters Reagan's room, he finds Marin lying on the floor. After checking for a pulse, Karras realizes that Marin has passed away, and he is filled with a mix of grief and anger. The demon continues to taunt Karras, pushing him to his limits. So, in a desperate move, Karras challenges the demon to possess him, and the demon agrees, and finally releases Reagan. However, just before the demon can fully take over, Karras sacrifices himself to save Reagan. He leaps from Reagan's window and tumbles down the same stairs where Dennings had met his death, effectively sacrificing his own life to rid Reagan of the malevolent entity. A little over a month after the exorcism, Chris and Reagan finish packing up their belongings in the Georgetown home. Reagan, no longer afflicted by the malevolent entity, has little to no memory of the possession or subsequent exorcism. Unfortunately, this means the real Regan never got the chance to meet Father Karras or Father Merrin, who were the two men who sacrificed their lives to save hers. The book then concludes with Chris and Regan leaving the house to return to their home in Los Angeles. In the case of The Exorcist, the Ouija board makes only one appearance during the story. Unlike the Robbie Doe story, the Ouija is confirmed to be the vessel the demon uses to possess Regan, which makes it the catalyst of that evil and possession. Surprisingly, when the novel was first released, it didn't sell well. However, the author, William Blatty, began making appearances on talk shows discussing the novel's themes of the devil and the power of the Catholic Church, which eventually sparked interest and gained traction for the book. Still, the brief appearance of the Ouija board in the novel wasn't enough to convince people of its power to conjure evil forces. It was only 2 years later, in 1973, when The Exorcist was adapted into a motion picture, that the Ouija board would finally earn its infamous reputation. Before we delve into this section, I'd like to offer my condolences to the family of William Friedkin. Friedkin, who was the director of the film adaptation of The Exorcist, tragically passed away on August 7th, 2023 due to heart failure. Rest in peace to William Friedkin, an individual who undoubtedly left a mark on the landscape of horror cinematography forever. On December 26, 1973, the film adaptation of The Exorcist was released in theaters across the United States. William Blatty, who was the author, fought hard to secure a position on the film crew to ensure that his story remained true to the book. Eventually, Warner Bros. Brought him on as a producer and entrusted him with writing the screenplay. Blatty's involvement in the movie resulted in a very faithful adaptation. While some B-plots and side stories had to be cut due to time constraints, the main plot involving Chris, Regan, Karras, Merrin, and Kinderman is overall well-developed and consistent with the novel. One scene directly reflected from the novel is the Ouija board scene. And this right here, is what I believe gave the board its infamous reputation. Curiously, the Ouija scene is not any more detailed in the movie than it is in the novel. However, my belief on why the movie scene had more impact boils down to two reasons. Firstly, the Exorcist film was far more commercially successful than the novel. It reached a wider audience, which exposed more people to the terrifying depiction of the Ouija board and its role in summoning evil forces. More importantly, audiences could physically see the Ouija board in the film, rather than just read about and experience with it. The sight of the Ouija board and the subsequent events that occurred as a result of its involvement led many to question the possibility of evil entities coming through the board. Audiences witnessed an otherwise harmless child being taken over by a demonic entity. They saw this child spout blasphemous ideas, as well as perform horrid acts, all of which occurred after only a short time of using a Ouija board. The Exorcist was by no means the first nor the last film or novel to portray the board in a negative light. However, it cannot be understated how much of a cultural phenomenon The Exorcist was and the exposure and power this film had and still continues to hold to this very day. The Exorcist is often followed with the phrase, the scariest film ever made. And even though I don't personally share that sentiment, I still think this is a fantastic film. But try and think about the time of this film's release. It was 1973, and while other horror films had been released around the same time, The Exorcist managed to garner the same fear and panic that the Universal monster films had achieved in the 1930s. While I think the Universal monsters are more a product of their time but are still great, The Exorcist holds up far better and remains a cultural phenomenon. This is largely due to the reception of the film that inevitably gave its tagline, the scariest film ever made. During showings, multiple audience members reportedly fainted from fear or shock. Theaters reported numerous instances of vomiting during the movie and in the bathroom after the audiences left. The scenes where Regan is using the crucifix especially affected Christian viewers because, yeah, of course it would. The fainting and vomiting became so frequent that some theaters had ambulances on the property during the Exorcist run at the box office. When the film was initially released, the distributor Warner Bros. Didn't have high hopes for the film. They believed that those controversial scenes would cause the movie to fail. Instead, these scenes gripped and also terrified the audience. Once the film started to become a phenomenon and turn a profit, Warner Brothers then used these terrifying experiences patrons has as advertising for the movie, basically embracing and relishing in the fear the movie caused. Unsurprisingly, as mentioned before, many of those of the Christian faith were appalled by the movie. However, there were also quite a few that saw the movie as one of the most pro-religious and more specifically pro-Catholic films ever made. Of course, it's easy to see why these differences are present. For those against the movie, it was as blasphemous as a film could be. Additionally, many Catholic viewers didn't like the film for portraying the idea that exorcisms were a common practice, even though both the novel and film explicitly stated that exorcisms aren't common are a last resort treatment. Religious viewers in support of the movie saw The Exorcist as one of the most pro-Catholic films ever made. William Blatty, who was obviously the author of the novel, was a practicing Roman Catholic, and the novel makes it very obvious that Catholic priests are the heroes of the story. The film wasn't only perceived as evil after its release, but during its production as well. In what has now become one of the most popular urban legends of cinema, The Exorcist was reportedly cursed. This stemmed from multiple reports of technical and production issues on the set of the film. Early on during filming, a bird flew into a circuit breaker and triggered a chain reaction that burnt down the entire McNeil home scene in the film, except for Reagan's room. Linda Blair, who played Reagan, and Ellen Durston, who played Chris, both sustained lifelong back injuries on set. In the bed shaking scene, Blair was improperly secured in the rig, leading to a back injury and her eventual condition of scoliosis. Similarly, Burston developed chronic back problems after the scene where the possessed Reagan throws Chris to the ground, which fractured Burston's tailbone. Surprisingly and remarkably, the takes where these actresses are injured are the ones that are present in the film. Jack McGowan, who played Burke Dennings, passed away a week after completing his scenes, and similarly, the actress who played Karis's mother died shortly after her scenes as well. Multiple technicians and staff behind the scenes faced personal losses during the film's production. During a realistic angiography scene performed on Reagan in The Exorcist, the treating doctor, Paul Bateson, was a real-life radiographer, chosen by director William Friedkin after observing Bateson perform a similar procedure. Bateson's role and later crime added to the movie's cursed reputation. Reporter Addison Verrill was found dead on September 14, 1977, beaten and stabbed in his apartment. No valuables were taken, indicating a movement or a motive beyond robbery. The lack of forced entry suggests Verrill let the murderer in. Verrill's friend Arthur Bell, who was a journalist, posted an article urging information on the murder and criticizing the police for neglecting crimes against homosexuals. A week later, a caller claiming responsibility provided details to Bell. The caller, disputing Bell's description of him as a psychopath, confessed to the crime driven by personal struggles. Bell contacted the police, who assigned a detective and hoped for another call to come through. A subsequent caller, known simply as Mitch, claimed that Paul Bateson, who was a friend he had in rehab, was the killer. Bateson reportedly confessed his crime to Mitch during an intoxicated phone call. Later that day, police arrested Bateson, who provided a handwritten confession matching the caller's statements. While Bateson's guilt in Verrill's murder was confirmed, suspicions arose about his involvement in other serial killings against gay men, although their methods differed. Ultimately, he was only found guilty on the murder of Addison Verrill and was sentenced to 20 years to life in 1979. He qualified for parole in 2003, and he seemingly disappeared after completing that parole in 2008. But a Social Security record suggests Bateson passed away on September 15, 2012. The so-called Exorcist curse is arguably one of Hollywood's most popular urban legends. Given the documented examples I've provided, you might be wondering how this qualifies as an urban legend and not just, an actual curse. So, during production, Friedkin and Blatty reportedly had multiple confrontations about the film. This tension likely arose from Blatty's desire for the film to closely resemble the novel, while Friedkin did seem somewhat adamant about creating the scariest film ever made. Friedkin played a significant role in Warner Brothers using the film's reception as a marketing tool and embracing The Exorcist's fear-inducing reputation. Additionally, he contributed to the belief that in the film's curse by making such claims himself. Blatty, however, opposed these claims since he created The Exorcist not as an ominous tale, but as an uplifting story that bolstered faith in the Catholic Church and the battle against evil. The film's reputation was already firmly established and remains ingrained in cultural memory, often regarded as one of the most impactful movies ever made. Its influence on the horror genre is undeniable, and it continues to be a prevalent reference in pop culture. Given the film's popularity, reception, and the controversies it stirred, it's easy to see how the spotlight turned toward the Ouija board. As previously mentioned, the Ouija board served as the trigger for possession, leading to events of murder and more. During the film's release, the Ouija board was still largely regarded as an innocent parlor game. However, the movie prompted suspicion about its true power. Could the board truly summon malevolent forces that unleash pain and horror? Following The Exorcist release, numerous reports emerged about entities contacted through the board turning malevolent and aggressive. Soon after, the Catholic Church intensified its opposition to the board, which led other denominations to also view the board as sinister. Reports of possessions and demonic activity, both involving and not involving Ouija boards, experienced a rise after the movie as well. Curiously though, Ouija board sales also surged following the film's release. This trend appeared to be driven by adults fearing the board, which led children and teenagers to purchase it as a means of terrifying their parents or other authority figures. Before we wrap things up, I want to kind of apologize for the weird structure of this video, because when I first started planning it, I thought this would be the big finale for the Ouija board series. But, as usual, I ended up going deeper than I expected in my research. So, when I realized how long this episode was turning out to be, I decided it'd be better to split it up into a few parts, which is why this video might feel a bit, odd. Just to give you a peek into my approach for this series, each episode has been kind of like peeling back different layers of the Ouija board. Episode 1 looked at its origins, this one's all about when the board got its evil reputation, and the next episode will dig into further explanation as to why people think the board is evil, and, explore the non-supernatural explanations and skeptical perspectives of the board. I know the first part of this video goes into the ideomotor effect, and while that's definitely a big part of the non-supernatural side, I included it here so you can see everything we talked about in this and the next video from both a supernatural and non-supernatural angle. Also, I've kind of realized that this episode kind of ended up becoming a summary, synopsis, and review of both the Exorcist novel and film, but I still think it's crucial to emphasize the significance of that story in relation to the legend and mythology of the Ouija board. In fact, the Exorcist will resurface in the next episode as the character Pazuzu seemingly inspired a entity rumored to be associated with the board known as Zozo. Overall, I don't have much to say in the way of this conclusion. Similar to the previous video, I want to wait for the finale of the series before I provide my full thoughts and conclusions. However, what I can speak on is where exactly I've been. The last video I posted was on July 17th, which was obviously well over a month ago by the time that you all are seeing this. There are multiple reasons why this video has taken so long and why my uploads are already sporadic and randomly timed. First off, when I'm not making videos, I still work a full-time job. Not only that, but I work an outside position as a full-time job, which obviously drains most of my energy. Where I live has been especially hot and miserable over the last few weeks, so it's been hard for me to even find the energy to sit down and focus on these videos. It's been hard for me to find the energy to sit down and work on anything at all. Additionally, there's a few other things that made it difficult to dedicate time to this video. My birthday was on August 10th, and I managed to get a 3-day weekend for my birthday. I planned to fully enjoy my weekend and get some much needed rest. However, 2 days before my birthday, a stray dog appeared on my girlfriend and I's doorstep. It was late at night when he showed up. and we decided to keep him for the night and start trying to search if anyone was missing a dog. After my birthday, no one, claimed him or anything. We had a long discussion about whether or not we had the means to keep him, but ultimately we decided we wouldn't be able to accommodate what he needed. We took him to a well-reviewed no-kill shelter in our area, but in the short time that we had him no more than at least 4 or 5 days. In the short time he was here, me and my girlfriend grew very attached to him, and it hit us both pretty hard to have to surrender him. So what was originally supposed to be my nice, relaxing 3-day weekend for my birthday turned into a week-long stretch of sadness and heartbreak. But now we're doing much better, but it was hard for the time. All in all, since the last video, not a lot of things have gone well, to say the least. And I'm not telling you all these things as an excuse for the delay, but more so you understand what's been going on and where I've been. However, in a case of some unfortunate timing, my girlfriend and I will be heading on vacation soon. Depending on when this video is released, we might be on vacation when this video comes out. For the week we'll be on vacation, I promised myself and everyone around me to actually relax and enjoy my time off. I made this promise because I personally struggle with giving myself breaks and letting myself relax and enjoy my off time. But unfortunately, that means that these videos also qualify as work, so I won't be working on anything on this side as well. But I do promise that I will be back. I'm not going anywhere. My plan is the plan is for the next video to absolutely be the last one. I try to keep you all updated through like my social channels and through the community tab here on YouTube. But my plan is for the next video to wrap up the Ouija series, because I really don't want to make a part 4, but if it comes to it and it has to be done, I'll do it. But that's my plan, is for the next video to be the last one. But for a little bit, I'm going to be away. I don't know how long. It might not be as long as, this was, because like I said, a lot of things have been happening and working outside. I'm just tired all the time. And also right now, if I seem kind of out of it right now and my voice kind of sounds weird, I'm also getting sick right now, it feels like. So that's also been fun the past couple days. So just one thing on top of the other has kind of been slowing me down on this end. But I came back, I did this video, and I'm going to try to be back as soon as possible so I can come back to making these videos, and I want to look to improve every video I make from now on. Every one that comes after this, the next video after, trying to figure out how to describe this. Whenever I make a video, my goal is always to make the next one even better than the one before. Whether that be with editing, with research, with anything. But I feel like this video, if I could talk to you all kind of personally about my process and stuff, I'm not super stoked about the outline that I had for this video, but I think it's just because so much has been going on and I haven't been able to really just like sit down and think about all this stuff. And also, like I said, I planned for this to be the final episode. I was never even planning to make multiple parts for the series. I thought I could one-off the Ouija board somehow, some way, even though this outline ended up longer than the last one that I made, but that's not important. I'm hoping that you all enjoy it. So yeah, I just want to look to improve these videos in each way I can, and I'm hoping to be back soon. I will be going on vacation soon, like I said, but I hope to be back soon, and I hope to see you all very soon. I hope you all enjoyed this video. I'm sorry again for the delay, but I hope you understand why the delay has happened. But yeah, thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see you all again very soon.